There is a moment, so quiet, so invisible, that most people miss it entirely. A moment where your entire life changes, not because the world shifts, but because you do. Because in that instant, you realize fear was never your enemy. It was never even real in the way you believed. And what you are about to discover tonight is not simply how to feel better. It is the hidden truth that dissolves fear at its root. A truth that will only fully reveal itself in the final breath of this journey. People come searching for answers about fear. They want to know how to defeat it, how to silence it, how to overcome it. But the very way they ask the question reveals something deeper. Because fear is not a monster outside of you. Fear is not an attack from the world. Fear is not a circumstance that happens to your life. Fear is a place, a room in consciousness, a state you have entered and mistaken for reality. And the moment you understand this, you stop fighting shadows. You stop wrestling with smoke. You begin to see what the mystics, the prophets, and the great teachers of imagination have always known. You do not conquer fear. You leave it. Because you cannot battle a state of consciousness. You can only move. You can only shift. You can only awaken into another dwelling place within yourself. This is not philosophy. This is not theory. This is law. A law as impersonal as gravity. A law that does not ask for belief. It operates whether you agree with it or not. Consciousness is the only reality, not as poetry, not as metaphor, as fact. Everything you experience is consciousness externalized. Your world is not happening to you. Your world is happening from you. The streets you walk, the conversations you fear, the money you worry about, the love you doubt, all of it is the echo of a state you are occupying. And this is why fear feels so convincing. Because when you are inside the state of fear, the world rearranges itself to match it. Fear does not predict disaster. Fear projects it. Fear is not a response. Fear is a residence. And most people live there so long they forget there are other places to exist. So let me ask you something. Right now. Not tomorrow, not when life improves, not when circumstances finally soften. Right now. Where are you living inside yourself? What state are you occupying beneath your thoughts? Because you can only live in one state at a time, and the state you occupy becomes the life you experience. If you dwell in the state where rejection is real, life will mirror rejection. If you dwell in the state where failure is inevitable, life will produce proof of failure. If you dwell in the state where you are powerless, then even miracles will feel distant. Not because the world is cruel, but because consciousness always reflects itself. The mirror does not choose, it only shows. And here is what changes everything. The solution is not to fight fear. The solution is to step into the state where fear cannot survive. There is a state where poverty has no air, where abandonment cannot breathe, where danger has no permission. And that state is not found in the outer world. It is found in assumption, in identity, in the inner dwelling place you choose to call home. And if you feel this truth stirring, if something in you recognizes this, then pause for a moment softly as part of this inner journey and leave a comment with something simple. I choose a new state. Just those words, a declaration, a doorway, because the moment you name the shift, you begin it. Now, let me take you deeper. Most people misunderstand what a state truly is. A state is not a mood. It is not a temporary feeling. It is not just an emotion passing through the body. A state is a position of being. A state is the assumption you are living from. It is what you silently accept as true. When you occupy fear, you are assuming something, that danger is more real than safety, that loss is more powerful than love, that what you dread has authority over what you desire. And assumptions are creative. Assumptions are not passive. Assumptions are not innocent. Assumptions are the architects of experience. This is why managing fear never works, because you cannot manage a state. while still living inside it. You cannot decorate a prison cell and call it freedom. You cannot affirm your way out while remaining seated in the same consciousness. The only way is movement. The only way is shift. The only way is entering the state of the wish fulfilled. Not someday, now. And there are moments in life where this becomes undeniable, where the law reveals itself with terrifying clarity and miraculous grace. Imagine a woman walking alone toward her work, the street quiet, empty, the air still. Then suddenly, a voice, harsh, violent, a man approaching with fury in his eyes. Everything in the body would scream, "Run!" Everything in the mind would shout, "Fear!" But in that moment, something deeper awakened in her, a contest, a holy test. She remembered what she had claimed to believe, that consciousness is all, that separation is illusion, that the world is yourself pushed out. And instead of entering the state of fear, she entered unity. She entered light. She entered the assumption, no harm can come to me because there is no other. And something extraordinary happened. The man stopped, as if the script vanished, as if the state that summoned him could no longer hold. He dropped what he carried. He passed quietly. The world rewrote itself, not because she fought, but because she shifted. And afterward, the world looked different, brighter, alive, as though she had stepped into another dimension, because she had, the dimension of a new state. Do you see it? She did not change him. She changed where she was living within herself, and life conformed instantly. This is the law, not force, not struggle, state. Now, if this message touches something in you, if you feel someone you love might need this same remembrance, share this video with them quietly, not as promotion, as care, as a lantern in the dark. Because sometimes one sentence at the right moment saves a soul from years of fear. And now we go further. Fear appears real because you are granting it reality through occupancy. Every moment you remain inside fear, you are assuming circumstances are greater than consciousness. But circumstances are not cause, they are effect. They are the shadow on the wall. The inner state is the fire, and assumption hardens into fact. This is the core. An assumption persisted in becomes experience, not because the universe rewards you, but because consciousness externalizes itself. So what are you assuming right now? Are you assuming the worst is coming? Are you assuming love will leave? Are you assuming money will vanish? Are you assuming you are trapped? Then life will mirror that, not as punishment, as law. But if you assume safety, if you assume success, if you assume peace, then peace begins to form. And here is where the teaching becomes practical. Living in the end is not visualizing occasionally. It is not hoping. It is not wishing. It is occupying the state where it is already done. And one of the most powerful demonstrations of this came from a man who refused to be imprisoned by circumstance, drafted into war, denied release, stamped with disapproved. Everything external said, "You are stuck." But he did not argue with the world. He did not beg a man in uniform. He went inward. Night after night he slept in New York in imagination. He felt his bed. He touched the furniture. He lived from the end. And then, a vision, a revision. The word disapproved scratched out, replaced with approved. And days later, reality obeyed. The same authority that denied him released him, because the outer world has no choice but to conform to the state you occupy. And somewhere around now, as this truth deepens, I want to invite you into something. If you are ready to stop drifting through old states, if you are ready to build a new life deliberately, join the 21-day challenge in the description or pinned comment. A simple journey of occupying the wish fulfilled, day by day. And then return with me immediately into the depth of this moment. Because the real transformation is happening right now. But listen closely. What if the fear you've been battling for years was never an enemy, but a doorway? What if the moment you stop running, you discover the state that makes fear impossible? Stay with me, because what comes next is where identity itself begins to dissolve. States are not emotions. This is crucial. You may feel trembling in the body and still not be dwelling in fear. You may feel doubt pass through and still remain faithful. Because feelings are weather, states are climate. The question is not what you feel. The question is what you are assuming beneath the feeling. Are you assuming the wish is done? Or are you assuming fear is justified? Because consciousness knows you cannot fool it. You can only dwell. And the world will only mirror. This is why techniques fail when identity remains unchanged. You can affirm from poverty and still be in poverty consciousness. You can visualize from loneliness and still be living in abandonment. The work is not doing more. The work is being more, occupying, dwelling, persisting. Now let me speak plainly. Circumstances do not create states. States create circumstances. The world is not the author, it is the page. Your consciousness is the pen. People say, "Of course I'm afraid, look at my life." But that is backwards. Your life is showing you your state. The mirror is reflecting. So stop blaming the mirror. Change the face, change the state, and watch reality rearrange. This is the great reversal. The moment you stop begging the world and begin commanding yourself. So what must you do? Identify the state you are in. Define the state you desire. Occupy it now. Persist. Return when you fall. This is living in the end, and yes, you will fall out. Fear will whisper. Old patterns will claw. This is not failure. It is the old state trying to survive. When that happens, you reset, you return, you re-enter, and the new state becomes home. And here is the question that changes everything. What if the life you call reality is only the past state still echoing? What if the moment you shift now, the entire future begins rewriting itself silently? Because what I'm about to tell you is the hidden secret beneath all manifestation. There is something deeper than occupying states, something beyond technique, beyond imagining scenes, beyond affirming. It is the death of an identity, the rebirth of a self. Because fear is not just a feeling, it is a costume you have worn too long, a name you have answered to, a story you have inhabited. And the final liberation comes when you no longer visit new states. You become them. You do not try to be safe. You are safety. You do not seek love. You are love. You do not chase abundance. You are the consciousness from which abundance flows. This is the advanced teaching, the shift where manifestation becomes inevitable, because you are no longer pretending. You are no longer reaching. You are no longer hoping. You are living as the one who already is. And when that happens, fear has nowhere to live, because fear requires an old self. Fear requires separation. Fear requires the illusion that something outside is greater than the consciousness within. But when you awaken, you realize there is nothing outside, only states, only mirrors, only God imagining. So tonight, do not ask how to defeat fear. Ask, where am I living, and where will I live now? Enter the state where your wish is fulfilled. Enter the state where peace is normal. Enter the state where you are already free. Persist until it hardens, and one day you will look back and realize fear did not disappear. You did. The one who feared died. The one who knows was born. And if you feel something in you awakening, if you feel this frequency calling you, then in these final breaths, subscribe. not as a channel action, but as an inner choice, to remain aligned with this remembrance, to stay in the state where consciousness is the only reality, and the life you desire is not coming, it is already waiting in the state you choose now. The night you finally understand this, you will not feel fireworks. You will not hear angels. You may not even feel brave. You will simply feel still. As if something inside you has stopped running. As if a door that used to slam in your face has quietly opened from the inside. Because the great mistake was never that you were afraid. The great mistake was believing fear was a thing to be fought, when it was only a room you kept returning to, by habit, by identity, by an old agreement you made with life when you didn't know you had authority. Fear is not a predator. Fear is an address. And the reason it has felt so personal is because you have lived there so long, it began to feel like your name. But you are not your fear. You are the one who occupies states. You are the one who moves. You are the one who decides what is real. The world has trained you to think your senses are sovereign, that sight is truth and sound is law. But your senses are late. They report the echo. They announce the aftermath. They deliver yesterday disguised as today. They are faithful servants, but terrible masters. If you follow them as leaders, you will always bow to appearances, always reacting, always managing, always repairing. But if you place them in their proper role, as witnesses rather than rulers, you begin to live from a different throne, the throne of consciousness. This is why the wisest teaching is never control your circumstances. It is choose your state, because the state is the cause and the world is the effect. Now let's speak about what people call real life: bills, deadlines, relationships strained by silence, diagnoses, rejection emails, loneliness that sits beside you like a second body. How, you ask, am I supposed to shift states when life looks like this? Listen carefully. Shifting states is not denying what you see. It is denying what you see the right to define you. Shifting states is not pretending a storm isn't there. It is refusing to build your home inside the storm. And this is where the law becomes intimate. Because the real battlefield is not the world. It is the moment you wake up and remember what you are, and then forget again. You will forget again. You will fall out. Not because you are weak, but because the old state has momentum. It has grooves. It has stories rehearsed in your nervous system. It has familiar pain that feels safer than unfamiliar peace. It will attempt to pull you back, not as a demon, but as a habit, as a gravitational field. And your work is not to hate that habit. Your work is to outgrow it, to stop calling it me, to stop saying, I'm just anxious, as if anxiety were your identity, to stop saying, I'm not the kind of person who, as if the past were a prophecy. The state that created your past is not allowed to dictate your future unless you keep feeding it your attention like daily bread. So here is the practice, simple but sovereign. When fear rises, you do not negotiate with it. You do not interrogate it. You do not ask it to explain itself. You identify it. And identification is power. Because the moment you can name a state, you have already stepped slightly outside it. You become the observer, the occupant, not the prisoner. In that moment you say inwardly, without drama, without hatred, this is the old room. And then you choose a new room, not through struggle, through assumption, through the quiet, audacious act of claiming a reality before it shows itself. This is the part people resist, because they want permission from the world. They want evidence before they move. They want the mirror to smile first. But the law has never worked that way. The mirror smiles when you do. The world shifts after you do. The outer changes when the inner has already changed. So let me take you deeper into the architecture of this. A state is a complete worldview, a complete identity, a complete of course. When you occupy the state of being loved, you do not constantly wonder if you are lovable. You simply move as one who is. When you occupy the state of being prosperous, you do not look at numbers with trembling reverence. You handle money like a natural extension of your life. When you occupy the state of being chosen, you do not hunt for approval. You radiate belonging. The state writes the script, and then life casts actors to play the roles required. This is why it can feel eerie when things begin to change. People start saying what you've been assuming. Opportunities appear with strange timing. Doors open where walls used to be. Not because the world suddenly became kind, because you stopped living in the state that required it to be cruel. But you might be thinking, what about danger? What about real threats? What about the things that truly could happen? And this is where the teaching becomes a blade of light. A circumstance can only continue as long as you remain the consciousness that sustains it. When you shift, the circumstance must either transform or exit, because it cannot remain in a world that no longer matches it. This is why those moments of sudden grace happen, where the argument dissolves, the problem resolves, the stranger softens, the email arrives, the unexpected yes appears. You didn't wrestle the world into submission. You withdrew your consciousness from the state that kept it alive. Now, there is something else you must understand, something subtle and fierce. You do not need to feel perfect to occupy a state. You do not need to feel ecstatic. You do not need to feel certain. You need only to decide what is true in consciousness, because the state is deeper than emotion. Emotion is surface foam. State is the sea. A person can be trembling and still be faithful. A person can be crying and still be living from the end. A person can feel the old state tugging and still choose the new one. This is not a performance. It is loyalty. Loyalty to the unseen. Loyalty to the inner throne. And yes, the old voice will say, this is delusion. But let me ask you, what has realism given you? The kind of realism that only accepts what is already visible has kept millions of people trapped in repeating lives, repeating heartbreak, repeating lack, repeating fear. That is not wisdom. That is surrender to yesterday. The law does not reward realism. The law rewards assumption. And assumption is not lying. Assumption is selecting the reality you will serve. It is choosing which truth you will feed. It is deciding which identity gets to wear your body today. Now, around this point in the journey, let the mind rest for a moment and let the soul answer. If you could leave one old state tonight, just one, what would it be? You don't need to write a paragraph, just a few words like a quiet vow. Comment it now as a declaration. I release blank. Fill in the blank with one state, one prison, one old room you're done renting. And feel what happens when you speak it, not to the world, but to yourself. Now, we continue. Because the most misunderstood part of this law is persistence. People assume persistence means strain. It doesn't. Persistence is simply returning, again and again. Like a sailor returning to the North Star, even when clouds cover it. You do not persist by forcing emotions. You persist by remembering who you decided to be. The new state is like a new language. At first you translate. It feels unnatural. You stumble. You revert to your native tongue. But if you keep returning, eventually you dream in it. Eventually it becomes your first language. Eventually the old language feels foreign. This is what happens when a state becomes home. But there is a threshold, a moment when the new state begins to harden. And you will know it, not because everything is perfect, but because the old state no longer seduces you the same way. The fear still knocks, but the door feels heavier to open. The doubts still speak, but their voice sounds less like authority and more like an old recording. The circumstances still show remnants of the past, but you no longer bow to them, because you understand, what I see is the echo, what I assume is the cause. And now, here is where the journey becomes cinematic. Imagine your consciousness as a vast mansion. Most people live their entire lives in one dim corridor. They decorate it with coping mechanisms. They learn where the floorboards creak. They memorize the cracks in the walls. They call it home. But the mansion has endless rooms, rooms of love, rooms of freedom, rooms of peace so deep it feels like being held by the universe itself. Rooms of wealth that isn't just money, but the feeling that life supports you. Rooms where you wake up and the air itself feels like agreement. And the only thing that decides which room you enter is assumption. Your hand is on the doorknob at all times. And fear is simply what happens when you keep returning to the same locked door and calling it fate. Now let me show you how to turn the knob, how to move in a way that is practical, not mystical. When you feel fear about something specific, money, health, love, purpose, do not fight the images, do not argue with the thoughts. Instead, ask one question: what would be true if this were already resolved? Not what would I do, not how would I get there. What would be true? What would you assume about yourself, about life, about tomorrow? Then take that truth and wear it. Wear it like a coat. Wear it like a name. Wear it like breath. Not in public performance, in private knowing. And if you need an anchor, choose a single inner scene, not to manipulate the world, but to stabilize your state. A scene of you opening your banking app and exhaling, calm. A scene of you hearing the words, "Everything looks great." A scene of you sitting beside someone you love, feeling chosen. A scene of you walking in sunlight with no weight on your chest. You enter the scene not as a visitor, but as the one who lives there. And then you fall asleep in that state, not sleep as escape, but sleep as sealing. Because sleep is the doorway where the conscious guard relaxes and the deeper assumption sinks. But even if you don't sleep, if you're listening right now in the middle of a loud day, you can still shift. Because the shift is not dependent on quiet, it is dependent on decision. And now, listen. There is a difference between imagining and inhabiting. Imagining is watching a movie. Inhabiting is living inside it. Imagining is wishing. Inhabiting is being. And the world responds to being. So don't treat your inner work like homework you do to get something. Treat it like the place you live. Because when you live there, reality has no choice but to follow. And yet, there is a deeper layer still, the layer that frightens the old self. Because if you truly accept this law, you cannot remain a victim. You cannot keep blaming people. You cannot keep waiting for rescue. This law gives you something terrifying and holy. Responsibility, not guilt, not shame. Responsibility as power. It says, your consciousness is creative, which means if you don't like what you see, you don't curse the mirror. You choose a new reflection. And yes, this can feel like the ground moving beneath you, because the old identity survives by saying, I'm stuck. But the new identity rises by saying, I can move. What if the reason your manifestations have felt delayed is not because the universe is slow, but because you keep returning secretly to the old identity, the one who hopes, the one who tries, the one who waits? What if the final secret is not technique, but the death of that identity, so completely that the wish fulfilled is no longer something you reach for, it is simply what you are? Stay with me, because now we enter the fire. There is a moment in every true transformation where the old self begins to panic, because the old self doesn't fear failure as much as it fears change. It fears losing its familiar pain. It fears the unknown even when the unknown is good. It fears the death of its story. And this is why people sabotage themselves at the edge of breakthroughs. They say they want the new life, but their identity is still loyal to the old one. So the law does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. And what you are is revealed by what you repeatedly return to when no one is watching. Your private dwelling, your secret assumptions, your inner home. So the advanced work is this. You do not merely visit the state of the wish fulfilled. You renounce the state of fear as a false identity. You stop introducing yourself to life as the one who struggles. You stop negotiating with the world from the posture of lack. You stop praying like a beggar. You stop loving like someone afraid to be left. You stop creating like someone afraid to be seen. and you begin to live as the one who is already answered. This is not arrogance. This is alignment. This is the difference between a candle and a sun. The candle asks the darkness for permission. The sun does not. The sun simply is, and darkness rearranges. So what does it mean to let an identity die? It does not mean hating yourself. It means releasing the agreement. The agreement that says, this is who I am. The agreement that says, this is how life treats me. The agreement that says, I always lose. The agreement that says, it never works out. Those are not facts. They are states you have rehearsed until they feel like facts. And the law says, rehearse something else. Not with strain, with devotion, with inner loyalty, with the kind of persistence that doesn't panic. Because the new self is calm. The new self is not desperate. The new self doesn't chase signs. The new self doesn't require constant proof. The new self knows it is done in consciousness, therefore it must appear. And when you live as that self, you begin to experience a strange kind of quiet power. You stop explaining yourself. You stop begging. You stop fearing other people's moods. You stop scanning the horizon for disaster. Because the state of safety becomes normal. The state of love becomes natural. The state of being supported becomes expected. And then, the world begins to move like it has been waiting for you.
But let me be honest with you. There will be a night, maybe soon, where the old world will throw one last performance. A final attempt to convince you that you should return to fear. A message that triggers you. A delay that teases you. A silence that dares you to doubt. And this is the final initiation. Not because life is cruel, because the law is precise. It reveals what you are faithful to. So when that moment comes, do not interpret it as punishment. Interpret it as the echo fading, the candle flickering as it runs out of wax. The old state collapsing because you are no longer feeding it. And in that moment, the most powerful thing you can do is not to fight. It is to remain loyal to the new state without drama, to say inwardly, this is not my home anymore, and then return again to the end. Return to the feeling of doneness. Return to the identity that is already living the life you desire. Return until the return becomes effortless. Now, here's the hidden promise I gave you at the beginning. I said there is a truth that will fully reveal itself in the final breath of this journey. So let me bring it closer. Fear survives on one illusion, separation, the idea that life is out there and you are in here. The idea that circumstances stand above you like judges. The idea that other people hold the keys to your worth. But the deepest state, the one where fear cannot exist, is not simply confidence. It is unity. It is the remembrance that consciousness is all there is, not as a belief, as a living perception. And when that perception dawns, even briefly, you understand why fear is always trembling. Because fear is the shadow that appears when you forget you are the light. So the final secret is not be brave. The final secret is be awake. Awake to what you are. Awake to the cause behind the world. Awake to the fact that your awareness is the creative power itself. And now, in these closing moments, softly, gently, if you want to remain in this frequency, if you want to keep returning to this remembrance, then subscribe. Not as a habit, as a choice. A choice to stay aligned with this path where fear is not managed, it is outgrown. Where life is not begged for, it is assumed. Where your imagination is not fantasy, it is the throne. And as you go back into your day, into your night, into your life, do not ask, what will happen to me? Ask,
Where will I live within myself? Because the world will always meet you there. And when you finally realize that the there is not a place, but a state, you will understand why the transformation was never outside. It was always one inner step away, one silent decision, one new assumption, one new home. And from that home, a new world begins.